The town of Douma in Syria has been under siege for 18 months. Its inhabitants stuck between rebels who hold the town and President Assad's forces who've tried to retake it with the ferocity now all too common in the 3 years of this brutal civil war. The increasingly desperate people of Douma live only 7 miles from the presidential palace in the capital Damascus. Thanks to a local ceasefire, a United Nations relief convoy was today able to reach them. Our international editor Lindsay Hilsum went with them and sent us this report.
This was only the second UN convoy to reach Douma in 18 months. Rebel fighters lined the road. We passed one vehicle with the emblem of the jihadi group Jabhat al-Nusra. Douma's under siege, but there's some food on the hoof. Everyone was happy to see us. Welcome. We saw signs of war everywhere. It's made amateur journalists of a generation of young men. The aid workers unloaded their cargo at the Red Crescent warehouse. Food, medicine, soap, things we take for granted are valuable, rare commodities when you live under siege. The UN is trying to reach 50,000 people, but for months the government has refused access to Douma. Sometimes the rebels refuse to cease fire, but today the aid got through.
We have been slow, but it's not by design. It's not that we were sitting and saying, you know, the situation is not dire or dramatic. It is dire, and it is growing by the day. But it is also the nature of this conflict that has actually implanted so many obstacles in reaching people, but also in delivering aid to them, not only once or twice, but on a continuous way.
While fighters in other Damascus suburbs have surrendered to the forces of President Bashar al-Assad, here in Douma, the Free Syrian Army is still in charge.
Ceasefire and reconciliation are out of the question.
But the people are hungry.
He killed our kids. He killed our women. He raped our women. He destroyed our houses. There is no way.
The fighters here may say they're not going to give up, but in other places they are doing. Their wives, their daughters, they're hungry. They're desperate for medicine. Siege is one of the most brutal, cruel and ancient military tactics, and it works.
Some of the food was distributed in the neighbouring suburb of Mizraba, also under siege. It grew chaotic. They're not starving here, because some supplies are smuggled in, but those who used to be middle class are now poor, and the poor are now destitute.
It's only the second time we've been here in almost 18 months. There are families that are obviously very desperate for food, and we're here to provide that food. We brought in enough food today for 5,000 people, but that's only a drop in the ocean. We need to be feeding 50,000 people here every single month.
The women weren't going to tell me that they wanted their men to surrender. They just said, we want our old life back, when our men went to work and earned money, and we could feed our children. They said, we just want this to end.
Well, Lindsay joins me now from Damascus. Lindsay, I mean, the images from Douma are very striking. How typical is Douma, or is it a one-off experience?
No, I think it's typical of many of those areas which are still held by the rebels, but where supplies are coming in, they're smuggled in. And so they're hugely expensive and people can scarcely afford anything. They're having to use firewood instead of fuel, and they're in a terrible situation, but not actually starving. Yet in the center of town, there's a place called Yarmouk. It's actually a Palestinian refugee camp. They can't grow their own food or get anything in, and they really are desperately hungry. So it is much worse in some other places. And what the UN was saying to me today, they said it took them 2 weeks to negotiate the ceasefire to get that food and those other supplies into Douma today, and hopefully tomorrow and the next day. But in other places, they have to negotiate not just with the government, which is often obstructive, but with maybe 30 or more different rebel groups, all saying, well, you know, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't go here, you can't go there. It's a tremendously difficult task. Today, they said, was a really good day. Most days are not so successful.
Well, given the very fragmented picture that you just painted, who's got the upper hand at the moment in the fighting?
Well, around the Damascus area, the government has made gains, partly because of the success of this brutal tactic of siege. But in the last week or so, the rebels have taken some villages near Latakia. That's actually President Assad's hometown up on the coast. And so they have made some gains there. But you know, who's up, who's down? It's a stalemate. No one is winning this war, even though the government, I think, feels that it is winning at the moment. And as I left Douma today, we drove out and I looked at people at the side of the road. They're trapped. They can't get out. Not even the pregnant women. They're stuck. They're the real prisoners of the war in Syria.
Lindsay Hilsum, thank you very much indeed.